My name is Victoria Ashford. I am 38 years old. And I live outside Greenwich, Connecticut, in a stone mansion called Windermere. On the night my husband locked me outside in the snow, he believed the house behind him belonged to him. The guests laughing through its windows were his guests, and the woman sitting in my chair would soon become its new mistress. He was wrong about all three. The party had been advertised as our 12th anniversary celebration, though by 9 o'clock it looked more like Adrian's coronation. 200 candles burned along the dining room walls. A string quartet played beneath the carved oak gallery. Snow moved past the windows in thick silver sheets, turning the gardens into a white blur. Nearly 100 guests had come from Adrian's investment circle, his family, the local real estate world, and the private club where he spent more time than he spent with me. At the head of the table stood the chair my mother had used every Christmas until the year she died. It was a high-backed walnut chair with hand-carved roses along the frame. I had never called it a throne, but everyone in our family understood that it was not simply furniture. It was the place from which my mother had welcomed people, settled arguments, and made even the most nervous guest feel as though there was room for them. That night, Lydia Vale was sitting in it. She wore a winter white gown, a diamond clasp at her throat, and the satisfied expression of a woman who had been told the ending before anyone else had read the final page. One hand rested on the arm of my mother's chair, the other held a coupe of champagne. Adrian stood behind her with his palm on her bare shoulder. My place card had been moved to the far end of the table beside the service door. For several seconds I said nothing. I watched Adrian's sister suppress a smile. I watched his mother lift her glass toward Lydia, as though making a private toast. I watched the guests closest to them pretend to examine the floral arrangements. They knew exactly what they were seeing. They simply had not decided whether cruelty was more entertaining than decency. "Lydia," I said. "That is my seat." She glanced at the ivory card in front of her. My name had been crossed out in blue ink. Hers had been written above it in Adrian's handwriting. "Adrian asked me to sit here," she replied. "He said the evening needed someone who understood how to host." A few people laughed. Adrian did not look embarrassed. He looked relieved that Lydia had said it first. "Victoria," he said, "do not start. I am not starting anything. I am asking your guests to leave my mother's chair." Lydia raised the champagne to her lips. "It is a chair. It is also inside my home." That was when Adrian's face changed. For months, he had trained himself to smile whenever I questioned him in public. He used the smile the way other men used a locked door. It told everyone that I was emotional, that he was patient, and that whatever happened next would be my fault. But the words "my home" struck something raw in him. "Our home," he corrected. I held his gaze. "Then you should know better than to humiliate your wife in it." The quartet faltered. A violinist lowered her bow. Conversations around the table thinned into silence. Lydia stood slowly, but not to surrender the chair. She moved closer to Adrian and slipped her arm through his. "You see," she said to him, "this is exactly what I warned you about. She cannot tolerate anyone else having a moment." I could have told the room what I knew. I could have announced that Lydia had drafted a private listing package for Windermere, complete with photographs taken while I was visiting my father. I could have revealed that Adrian had presented a forged power of attorney to a bank 3 weeks earlier and attempted to pledge the estate as collateral for a luxury development that existed mostly in architectural renderings and investor promises. I could have described the messages between them discussing which rooms Lydia would redecorate after I was handled. Instead, I said, "Get out of the chair." Adrian crossed the space between us in 3 steps. His fingers closed around my upper arm so hard that pain flashed down to my wrist. The guests nearest us moved back. No one intervened. He pulled me away from the table, and when I resisted by planting one heel against the rug, he tightened his grip. "You have had enough attention. He whispered. "You are hurting me." "Good. Maybe pain will teach you when to stop." He dragged me across the dining room. The quartet had gone completely silent now. Every face turned toward us. Someone lifted a phone. Then another. The scene developed its own terrible momentum. Adrian's father laughed under his breath. His mother said, "Honestly, Victoria, must everything become a performance?" Lydia remained beside my mother's chair, drinking champagne as though the room had finally been arranged correctly. Adrian pulled me through the great hall, past the garlanded staircase and the portrait of my mother, toward the front doors. My shoes slipped on the marble. I grabbed the edge of a console table to steady myself. And he tore my hand away. "Let go of me. You should have left when I told you. You told me to leave my own anniversary party. I am telling you again." He opened the front door. Wind drove snow across the threshold and scattered it over the polished floor. The cold struck my face hard enough to steal my breath. For 1 second, Adrian hesitated. Not because he regretted what he was doing. He was calculating whether the guests would see him as decisive or cruel. Lydia called from the dining room. "Do it. Adrian. She will only ruin the rest of the night." That decided him. He shoved me. My heel caught on the stone threshold. I fell onto the front steps, struck one knee, and slid into the snow beside the frozen fountain. The cold entered my dress immediately. I heard laughter from inside, not everyone, but enough. Adrian stepped onto the porch, threw my coat after me, and pointed toward the gates. "Go to a hotel," he said. "Come back when you can behave like an adult." Then he shut the door. The lock turned. Through the tall windows I could see the dining room. Lydia returned to my chair. She raised her champagne. Adrian's mother leaned toward her, smiling. Behind them, the guests began talking again with the strange eagerness of people relieved that cruelty had chosen someone else. I did not bang on the door. I did not scream for the staff. I did not crawl through the snow to prove that the woman inside had taken my place. I put on my coat, though my hands shook so badly that I missed the first button. Then I reached into the small pocket sewn inside my dress and took out my phone. There were 3 unread messages from my father. The first said, "Is he going through with it?" The second said, "The bank has confirmed the signature is fraudulent." The third said, "Say the word." I pressed his number. He answered before the first full ring. Victoria's snow gathered in my hair and melted against my cheek. I looked through the window at Adrian pouring champagne for Lydia beneath my mother's chandelier. "Dad," I said, "bring the documents." My father did not ask what had happened. He said, 10 minutes. Then the call ended. I stood in the snow and watched the driveway. At first there was only darkness beyond the iron gates. Then, exactly 9 minutes later, white headlights appeared between the trees. 1 pair became 4. Then 8. The gates opened without anyone inside the house touching the controls. A line of black vehicles entered the property, tires crushing fresh snow in perfect parallel tracks. The first was my father's armored sedan. Behind it came 2 SUVs, a bank vehicle, and a dark van belonging to the legal and forensic team that had spent the previous month documenting what Adrian believed no one had noticed. Inside the house, someone saw the motorcade. The music stopped for a second time. Adrian ran to the door. He opened it wearing the bright, desperate smile he used whenever a person with more money entered the room. He did not look at me first. He looked past me at the approaching cars. "Graham," he called, spreading his arms as though welcoming a beloved relative. What an incredible surprise. My father stepped from the sedan. Graham Ashford was 71, silver-haired, and slower than he had once been. But nothing about him suggested frailty. He wore a black overcoat over a dark suit. Our family attorney stepped out behind him, carrying a leather document case. The chief risk officer from North Atlantic Bank emerged from the second vehicle. 2 auditors followed. At the rear of the motorcade, a woman from the county property fraud unit closed the door of the van and looked directly at Adrian. His smile began to fail. My father stopped beside me. He saw the snow on my dress, the bruise darkening beneath Adrian's fingerprints, and the blood where my knee had struck the stone. He did not ask whether I was all right. He knew I was not. He turned to Adrian. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Is my daughter standing outside her own house?" Adrian's eyes moved from my father to the attorney, then to the bank officer and the investigators behind them. "It is a misunderstanding," he said. Victoria became upset. We were giving her a moment to calm down. I stepped onto the porch. "No," I said. "You dragged me out, threw me into the snow, and locked the door." The guests had gathered behind Adrian. Their faces filled the windows and the open hall. Lydia stood just beyond them in my mother's chair's line of sight, still holding the champagne, though her hand was no longer steady. Adrian lowered his voice. "Victoria, we can discuss this privately. That option ended when you made it public." I looked at my father, then at the leather case in our attorney's hand. "Open the doors," I said. "Everyone who watched him remove me should hear why he no longer has the right to remove anyone." The winter wind moved through the hall. Adrian remained in the doorway, blocking it. My father did not raise his voice. "Move," he said. And for the first time that evening, Adrian obeyed. 36 hours earlier, I had been sitting alone in Wintermere's small morning room with a forged version of my signature glowing on a laptop screen. The room faced east and received the first light over the frozen lake. My mother had used it for correspondence. She kept blue stationery in the top drawer, wrote thank you notes in ink, and believed a person's character could be measured by how they behaved when no audience was present. After she died, I preserved the room almost exactly as she left it. Adrian called that sentimental. Lydia, in one of the messages I later recovered, called it dead woman decor. I had not intended to read their messages. I had intended to review a routine notice from North Atlantic Bank. The notice arrived in a plain envelope addressed to the Ashford Family Residential Trust. It requested confirmation of a proposed credit facility secured against Wintermere and referred to an authorization signed by me 4 days earlier. I had signed nothing. The proposed loan was for $18 million. The borrower was Aldervale Development Group, a company formed 7 months earlier by Adrian and Lydia. The project description promised a private alpine club in Vermont with 24 villas, a spa, a landing pad, and guaranteed access to an elite international membership network. The bank file described Wintermere as Adrian's unencumbered marital residence and named him authorized trustee under a power of attorney. The power of attorney carried my name. The signature looked convincing from a distance. Up close, it was too smooth. Whoever had copied it had traced the version printed on our wedding license, including a small upward loop I stopped using after my mother died. I called the bank from the morning room. The woman in the trust services department became careful the instant I told her the document was fraudulent. She asked me to verify my identity, then transferred me to risk management. Within an hour, the loan was frozen. By noon, the bank's chief risk officer had sent a secure copy of the application to my father's attorney. I could have confronted Adrian immediately. 12 years earlier, I would have walked into his office, held up the forged authorization, and demanded the truth. Then he would have denied, minimized, and finally confessed only to the smallest part I could already prove. He would have called it a misunderstanding. He would have blamed a junior lawyer, an automated form, or my failure to communicate. By the end of the conversation, I would have been apologizing for distrusting him. That cycle had taken me years to recognize. So I did not confront him. I called my father. "Do not touch anything else," he said after I explained. "Do not forward the file to your personal email. Do not tell Adrian the bank contacted you." You think there is more? I think a man does not forge a trustee's signature for $18 million unless he has practiced smaller lies first. My father was not a detective. He had built Ashford Property Holdings from a regional construction firm into a company that owned apartment towers, logistics centers, hospitals, and hotels. He understood documents because documents were the bones of his world. He also understood Adrian because he had distrusted him from the first year of our marriage. I had mistaken that distrust for class prejudice. Adrian did not come from poverty. His family had money, but it was old enough to have acquired habits and too diminished to sustain them. They maintained club memberships, leased luxury cars, and treated every dinner as an audition for a life they could no longer afford. When I met him at a preservation fundraiser, he was charming, attentive, and refreshingly unimpressed by my father's name. He said he wanted to build something without inherited advantages. I believed him because I wanted to believe that choosing him proved I was more than an heir. The truth was that Adrian had not been unimpressed by inheritance. He had been studying it. Wintermere became the center of that misunderstanding. The estate had belonged to my mother's family for 4 generations. It was not the largest Ashford property, but it was the only one that felt like home. My mother, Eleanor, inherited it from her aunt. Before her final surgery, she transferred it into a protected family trust. The terms were simple. I held the exclusive beneficial interest. My spouse could reside there during our marriage. Neither of us could mortgage, sell, subdivide, or materially alter the property without written approval from the trustee board, and any act of fraud, violence, or attempted unauthorized transfer automatically terminated the spouse's right of residence. My father served as chair of the trustee board. 2 independent attorneys held the other seats. Adrian received a full copy of the trust agreement before we moved in. He attended a meeting where each restriction was explained. He initialed every page. He never read them. I knew, because he had joked about it afterward. 40 pages to say, "Your father still wants a key," he said, dropping the agreement onto the kitchen counter. Lawyers make fortunes turning common sense into paper. At first, his carelessness seemed harmless. Later it became entitlement. He began calling Wintermere my estate at parties. He commissioned a family crest for the gates, using his surname. He told magazines that he had restored the property, though the restoration had been managed and paid for through my mother's trust years before he arrived. When a journalist once asked whether the estate came through my family, Adrian laughed and answered, "Marriage is a merger." I corrected him privately. He kissed my forehead and said, "You worry too much about technicalities." The technicalities were the only reason he did not already own everything he claimed. After the bank call, my father sent 2 people to Wintermere under ordinary pretexts. One was the trust's property manager, who came to inspect a heating issue. The other was a digital forensics consultant who arrived as part of the security company's scheduled winter maintenance. Neither spoke to Adrian. Both copied what they were legally authorized to inspect. By evening, we knew the forged power of attorney was not an isolated document. Adrian had submitted a draft deed transferring Wintermere from the family trust into a newly created marital holding company. The deed had not been recorded because the county clerk's verification system flagged the trustee information. Lydia had prepared a confidential sales memorandum describing the estate as an off-market trophy opportunity. She had taken photographs of the bedrooms, wine cellar, library, stable, and my mother's private jewelry room. She had entered the property into a broker-only database under a code name. The proposed asking price was $42 million. Their plan was not merely to borrow against the house, it was to obtain the loan. Use part of the money to begin the Vermont project. Then arrange a private sale before the trust discovered the transfer. Adrian expected to tell me afterward that financial necessity had forced his hand. Lydia expected to earn a 7-figure commission and move into Windermere once my marriage ended. The messages were devastating because they were so practical. There were no declarations of forbidden love. No poetry. No anguish. Lydia wrote, "Once V is out, the West Suite should be ours. The lake view will photograph better without her mother's furniture." Adrian replied, "Do whatever you want with the furniture. She will take the sentimental pieces and disappear." In another thread, Lydia asked whether I would challenge the sale. Adrian answered, "She folds when pressure becomes public. That is why the anniversary party matters." That sentence changed the shape of everything. The winter anniversary party had been Adrian's idea. He insisted on inviting investors, brokers, family, friends, and several people connected to the Vermont project. He said the event would reassure them that our marriage was strong and our household stable. I had assumed he wanted photographs. Now I understood he wanted witnesses. If he could provoke me into an emotional confrontation, have me removed from the party, and later describe me as unstable, he could support the false claim that I had voluntarily delegated financial authority to him. Lydia had already prepared talking points for guests likely to be interviewed during future litigation. I read the messages twice. Then I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Snow had begun falling over the lake. In the reflection, I could see my mother's desk behind me and my own face suspended over the dark glass. My first instinct was to cancel the party. My second was to let Adrian believe his plan was working. I called the trust attorney, Caroline Shaw. She had known me since I was 13 and had the unnerving ability to make silence feel like a question. "We can terminate his residence tonight," she said after reviewing the evidence. "The attempted mortgage alone is sufficient under Section 11. Would that expose Lydia's role? Not necessarily. Would it preserve the bank evidence? Yes. Would it show the investors that he built the project on fraud only if the matter becomes public? I looked at Adrian's message about pressure becoming public. He chose the anniversary party because he wants an audience. I said, maybe he should have one. Caroline was silent for a long moment. "What are you proposing? We let the party happen. The bank completes its internal review. The county investigator confirms the forged filing. Security preserves every camera angle. We prepare the termination notice but do not serve it until Adrian acts. That creates risk. I know. Physical risk." I looked down at the faint yellow bruise near my elbow from the week before. Adrian had grabbed me during an argument over Lydia's late-night calls. He apologized the next morning and sent flowers to my dressing room. The card said, "We both need to be gentler. He is already escalating." I said, "If I cancel the party, he will move the documents and say I misunderstood. If I confront him privately, Lydia will destroy her files. Tomorrow night gives us the bank representative, the broker records, the guests he recruited, and the house cameras. And what does it give you, the truth in the same room?" Caroline exhaled. "I will prepare everything. Your father will hate this plan. My father hates every plan he did not design. He may still be right. He can wait nearby." That was how the motorcade came to be 10 minutes away on the night of the party. It was not magic. It was preparation. My father, the attorney, the bank officer, and the investigators gathered at an Ashford-owned conference center 3 miles from Windermere. They had the original trust agreement, the rejected mortgage application, the forged power of attorney, the draft sales listing, the broker communications with Watchings and his 80 and Eder, and a temporary preservation order covering Adrian's electronic devices. They were waiting for my call. I told them I would call if Adrian attempted to remove me from the property. destroy evidence, or make the fraudulent ownership claim in front of witnesses. I did not predict that he would throw me into the snow, but by then, the documents were already on their way. When I stepped back into Wintermere, the room did not feel warmer. The fire still burned in the great hall. Champagne still gleamed in cut crystal. The air still carried pine, beeswax, and roasted rosemary from the kitchen. But the house had changed because the balance of knowledge had changed. 10 minutes earlier, Adrian believed everyone present knew the important facts. He was the owner. I was the unstable wife. Lydia was the desirable replacement. And my father was an aging businessman whose influence ended at the property line. Now a lawyer was opening a case in the center of the hall. Caroline Shaw removed 3 folders and placed them on the long entry table. She did not look dramatic. She wore a navy coat, flat shoes, and reading glasses. Her calm unsettled Adrian more than anger would have. Before anyone leaves, she said, I need to state that certain materials connected to an active property fraud inquiry are believed to be inside this residence. No guest is being detained. However, anyone carrying documents, devices, jewelry, or property that does not belong to them should place those items on the table and identify them. A nervous murmur moved through the crowd. Adrian laughed too loudly. This is absurd. Caroline, you are trespassing in my home. She opened the first folder. Wintermere is owned by the Eleanor Ashford Residential Trust. Victoria Ashford is the sole beneficiary. You possess a conditional license of residence through marriage. You do not hold title, beneficial interest, trustee authority, sale authority, or borrowing authority. Adrian's mother pushed forward from the dining room. Celeste Mercer wore emerald velvet and enough diamonds to make subtlety impossible. That cannot be right, she said. Adrian has lived here for 12 years. Caroline looked at her over the top of her glasses. Residence does not create title. He has maintained the property. The trust has paid all structural maintenance, taxes, insurance, staffing, and capital improvements. Adrian turned to me. You told me this was our house. I told you it was our home while we were married. You decided those words meant ownership. My father remained near the door. He had not taken the center of the room. And that mattered. In the stories Adrian told about my family, my father always arrived as a tyrant who controlled me. Tonight he stood back because the documents belonged to me. The decision belonged to me. And the voice Adrian had tried to silence was mine. Caroline removed a thick, cream-colored document from the folder. This is the trust agreement you signed 11 years and 8 months ago, she said. Your initials appear on every page. Your signature is notarized on the final page. She held it out. Adrian did not take it. I was told those were routine occupancy papers. You were represented by independent counsel. My lawyer barely explained them. Your lawyer submitted a written certification stating that he explained every restriction. Adrian looked toward the guests as though someone might rescue him by agreeing that paperwork was unfair. No one did. Several of the investors connected to Aldervale Development had moved away from his family and toward the bank representative. The chief risk officer introduced himself as Daniel Cho. Mr. Mercer, he said. North Atlantic Bank received an application naming Wintermere as collateral for an $18 million facility. The application included a power of attorney purportedly signed by Mrs. Bowses and ATIM. Ashford and a trustee certification purportedly signed by Ms. Planet. Shaw. Caroline lifted a second page. I did not sign this. Daniel looked at me. Mrs. Ashford confirmed she did not sign the power of attorney. Our document team identified multiple irregularities. We suspended the application and referred the file to our fraud unit. Adrian's father, Roland, stepped forward. Unlike Celeste, he looked less offended than frightened. He had invested heavily in the Vermont project and had persuaded several friends to do the same. "Adrian," he said, "tell them this is some administrative mistake." Adrian's eyes moved to Lydia. She was no longer in my mother's chair. At some point during Caroline's explanation, Lydia had slipped into the side corridor leading toward the service stairs. Her champagne glass sat abandoned on the table. The diamond clasp was gone from her throat. She carried a cream leather portfolio pressed against her ribs. I saw her first. "Lydia," I said. She stopped. Every head turned. "I need air," she replied. "The rear doors are through the kitchen. You are walking toward my mother's private rooms." "I was looking for the powder room." "You have attended 6 events here. You know where the powder room is." Lydia smiled, but the expression had lost all warmth. "Victoria, this is becoming humiliating. For you, for everyone." She took another step. The county investigator, Mara Ellis, moved into the corridor before Lydia reached the stairs. "Please return to the hall," Mara said. "You cannot hold me here." "I am not holding you. I am asking whether the portfolio you are carrying contains documents belonging to Aldervale Development, the Wintermere listing, or the Ashford Trust. It contains my personal papers. Then place it on the table and identify them." Lydia gripped the portfolio harder. "Adrian intervened. She is my business partner. Those documents are privileged." Caroline answered without turning toward him. "Real estate listing materials are not protected by marital privilege. And Miss Vale is not your attorney." Lydia's gaze met Adrian's. Something passed between them. Not affection, but calculation. Each was deciding whether the other remained useful. Then a chime sounded from the security panel. The estate manager, Mrs. Alvarez, entered from the staff corridor carrying a tablet. She had worked at Wintermere since my mother was alive. Adrian often treated her as invisible, which was why he forgot she had access to the security archive. "Mrs. Ashford," she said to me, "the front door recording is ready." Adrian's posture changed. "What recording, Mrs. daughter?" Alvarez connected the tablet to the hall display. The screen above the fireplace had been showing a slideshow of anniversary photographs. Our wedding portrait vanished. In its place appeared a wide-angle view of the front steps recorded 12 minutes earlier. Everyone watched Adrian drag me through the door. They heard me say, "You are hurting me." They heard Lydia call, "Do it." "Adrian." They saw him shove me onto the stone steps. They heard laughter from inside. They watched the coat land beside me and the door close. The recording continued for another 5 seconds. It captured Adrian turning the deadbolt and saying, "She will come back when she remembers who pays for this life." No one laughed now. Celeste stared at the floor. Roland looked older than he had when he arrived. One of Adrian's college friends lowered the phone he had been using to record the document, reading. Another guest quietly stepped away from Adrian as if violence were contagious. Adrian pointed at the screen. She slipped. The lie was so immediate that several people gasped. "You all saw it," he insisted. She pulled away from me. I opened the door because she demanded to leave. The camera angle makes it look worse. "Mrs. Alvarez replayed the footage. This time, the room heard the sound of his hand striking my shoulder as he pushed. Adrian's face reddened. "Turn it off." I looked at Mrs. Alvarez. "Pause it after the door locks." The image froze on Adrian's face through the glass. He was smiling towards someone inside. I turned to him. "You plan to describe me as unstable. You invited investors to watch. You moved my seat, placed Lydia in it, and expected me to explode. When I did not perform the role you wrote, you used force. That is your interpretation." "No. The camera is the interpretation you cannot edit. My father finally spoke. Caroline. Read. Section 11. She opened the trust agreement to a marked page. Section 11. Subsection C. Any spouse, domestic partner, licensee, or guest who commits physical violence against the beneficiary upon trust property, knowingly excludes the beneficiary from the residence, attempts to obtain title through false statement, or uses the property in furtherance of fraud, shall immediately and permanently forfeit all rights of occupation. Notice may be served orally in an emergency and confirmed in writing. She looked at Adrian. Mr. Mercer. Your license to reside at Wintermere is terminated effective tonight. The hall seemed to inhale. Adrian laughed again. But the sound had become thin. You cannot evict me in the middle of winter. This is not a landlord-tenant eviction. Caroline said. You are not a tenant. You are a revoked licensee under a private trust agreement you signed with counsel. I have marital rights. You may assert any lawful claim through family court. You may not remain in this house tonight. He looked at my father. You put her up to this? My father's expression did not change. I advised her to remove you months ago. She chose to investigate first. Adrian turned to me with genuine surprise. He had expected me to deny it. Perhaps to soften my father's words. I did not. Daniel Cho opened his own folder. There is another issue. He said, the bank application lists projected deposits from tonight's anniversary event as proof of investor commitment to Aldervale Development. Several transfers were scheduled to process tomorrow morning. Guests began speaking at once. What deposits? I was told this was only a reservation. He said the escrow was refundable. I never authorized collateral. Daniel raised a hand. If you signed an expression of interest or transmitted funds, our team will provide a secure contact before you leave. Do not send additional money. The bank has frozen all accounts directly connected to the application, pending review. Roland's face drained of color. How much is frozen? Daniel looked at Adrian. Not Roland. That information will be provided to authorized account holders. Adrian stepped toward me. You have destroyed the project. I did not move. You tried to finance it with a house you do not own. It would have made us hundreds of millions. Then why did it need a forged signature? Because you would have said no. That is what ownership means. For years, Adrian had accused me of being timid, domestic, overly cautious. He treated every boundary as evidence that I lacked vision. Standing in the hall, I finally saw the architecture of his ambition clearly. He did not believe risk should be shared. He believed consequences should belong to other people. Lydia suddenly set the portfolio on the entry table. There, she said. Now I am leaving. Mara Ellis opened it. The first item was a confidential brokerage agreement granting Lydia exclusive authority to sell Wintermere. The second was a set of enlarged interior photographs. The third was a velvet jewelry roll. Mrs. Alvarez's hand flew to her mouth. Mara unfolded the roll. Inside lay my mother's sapphire earrings, a diamond bracelet, 2 antique brooch, and the small gold locket containing a photograph of my parents on their wedding day. Lydia stepped back. I was protecting those. From whom? I asked. From the chaos tonight. They were locked in a private cabinet upstairs. Adrian gave them to me. Every eye moved to him. Adrian said nothing. Lydia continued quickly. He said they were marital property. He told me Victoria had agreed to sell some pieces to fund the development. I never agreed. You cannot prove that. Mrs. Alvarez tapped the tablet. The jewelry room camera records entry. She said, Mr. Mercer accessed the cabinet at 6:42 this evening using Mrs. Ashford's emergency key. Ms. Vale entered with him. Lydia closed her eyes. Adrian swore under his breath. Mara placed the jewelry roll beside the documents. Ms. Val, I strongly recommend that you remain available to answer questions. I want a lawyer. That is your right. I am not saying anything else. For once, I said, that may be wise. The guests stood between the dining room and hall, no longer sure whether they were witnesses, victims, or accomplices. Outside, the black vehicles idled beneath the snow. Inside, the anniversary candles had begun to burn low. I could have ordered everyone out immediately. Instead, I walked to the center of the hall. No one will be forced into the storm. I said, the staff will serve coffee in the library. Anyone who invested in Aldervale will receive the bank's contact information. Anyone who recorded what happened may preserve the recording and provide a copy to counsel. Adrian's family will be given transportation and time to collect coats and essential belongings. No one will remove documents, jewelry, computers, or items from private rooms. Celeste stared at me. After what you have done to us, you expect us to accept your hospitality. I am not offering hospitality. I said, I am preventing anyone from claiming I treated them the way your son treated me. My father looked at me, and in his eyes I saw grief mixed with pride. Adrian saw something else. He saw that even now, with every legal advantage and every witness watching, I would not become the monster he needed me to be. That frightened him more than revenge. The library became a waiting room for consequences. Mrs. Alvarez directed the staff with quiet efficiency. Wet coats were collected. Coffee, tea, and soup appeared without anyone being asked. The quartet packed their instruments and left through the service corridor after providing their names to the investigator. Several guests departed as soon as they were told they were free to go. Others stayed because they had invested money, signed letters, or heard Adrian make promises that now sounded like evidence. The room had once been my grandfather's study. Bookshelves climbed to the ceiling. A ladder ran along brass rails. My mother had replaced the old hunting trophies with paintings by local artists and photographs of Wintermere's gardens through each season. Adrian considered the room wasted space. He wanted to convert it into a cigar lounge. That night, it became the first place where people told the truth. The first investor to approach Daniel Cho was a retired surgeon named Dr. Armin. He had transferred $400,000 into what Adrian described as a protected escrow account. The money represented most of the proceeds from selling his medical practice. I was told the Ashford estate guaranteed the principal. He said. Daniel asked whether he had that promise in writing. Dr. Harmon produced an email on his phone. It came from Adrian's account and included a one-page family asset support letter carrying a scanned image of my father's signature. My father read it once. I did not sign this. The doctor's hands began to shake. A second investor, a widow from Adrian's club, had transferred $250,000. A third had signed a line of credit commitment secured by his business. Lydia had told each of them that the Vermont project was privately backed by the Ashford family and that tonight's party at Wintermere proved the relationship. The house was not simply collateral. It was theater. Its stone walls, old portrait, silver, staff, and history had been used to make a fraudulent project feel inevitable. Adrian had invited people to dine beneath my mother's chandelier so they would confuse access with ownership. I understood then why he needed Lydia in my chair. She was not only replacing me as his partner, she was performing the role of future lady of the estate for the investors he intended to impress. Caroline and Daniel set up a temporary intake table. Guests forwarded messages, contracts, and bank confirmations. Mara Ellis photographed documents and placed originals in evidence sleeves. My father called the company's outside forensic team and authorized them to provide free initial assistance to every guest who had invested based on a false Ashford guarantee. Adrian watched from across the room. He was not permitted upstairs without an escort. His phone and laptop had been preserved under the temporary order, though he still carried a second phone no one knew about. I noticed the shape of it against the inside pocket of his dinner jacket when he folded his arms. I said nothing yet. Celeste and Roland sat near the fireplace. Adrian's sister, Marissa, had stopped pretending the evening was amusing. She kept checking her husband's face. He had invested through a company in both their names. At last Celeste rose. "This spectacle has gone far enough," she said. "Victoria, you have made your point. Adrian made a mistake. Lydia clearly manipulated him. There is no reason to humiliate the entire family." Lydia, seated at the far end of the room beside her attorney's empty chair, laughed once. "Manipulated him," Celeste turned on her. "You were hired to market the project. And you used that position to seduce a married man. I did not forge his hand onto my shoulder at dinner. Do not be vulgar. Your son promised me this house." Celeste looked at Adrian. He looked away. Lydia leaned forward. "He showed me floor plans. He asked which bedroom I wanted. He told me Victoria would receive a settlement and leave before spring. He said you approved." "That is a lie," Celeste said. "Would you like me to play your voicemail?" The room went quiet again. Lydia picked up her phone from the evidence table only after Mara nodded. She opened an audio file and pressed play. Celeste's voice filled the library. "Lydia, dear, I know these situations are delicate. Victoria has never understood what Adrian needs, socially or professionally. Once the legal transition is complete, we will welcome you properly. The house needs a woman who is not afraid of people." The recording ended. Celeste's face collapsed inward. I was trying to keep peace. "No," I said. "You were planning my replacement." She turned toward me with tears in her eyes. "You never made an effort with us." For years, that accusation had worked. It required no specific example and made every boundary sound like a moral failure. I walked closer. "I paid for your husband's medical treatment when the insurance dispute delayed surgery. I covered Marissa's children's tuition during their bankruptcy. I hosted every holiday. I gave you access to this home when your own roof was being repaired. I stayed silent when you introduced Lydia as Adrian's real partner at the club because I did not want to embarrass you." Celeste's lips tightened. "You kept score. I kept records because your son forged documents. There is a difference." Roland stood beside her. "Victoria," he said. "I did not know about the power of attorney." "I believe you." Relief crossed his face too quickly. "I did know Adrian was trying to obtain financing." He continued. "He said the trust paperwork was being updated and that you had agreed in principle. I invested because I believed the family would support the project. You never asked me." He said you preferred not to discuss business. That was another phrase Adrian used to erase me. He told people I disliked finance. Legal matters. Negotiations. Conflict. Travel. Public speaking. And every other activity that might reveal I was not merely the quiet woman beside him. I worked in acquisitions for Ashford Property Holdings for 9 years. I said. I reviewed more development projects than Adrian has ever completed. Roland blinked. Adrian told us you handled charitable decorating projects. Across the room, my father's expression hardened. But he remained silent. I looked at Adrian. He shrugged. You left the company. I took leave when my mother became ill. You never went back. Because you asked me to help build your consulting business, and you agreed. Yes. That was my mistake. Not evidence that I lacked a career. The guests were listening differently now. Some knew me only as Adrian's reserved wife. Others had accepted his description because it was convenient. The truth did not transform them into heroes. It merely removed their excuse. Marissa spoke from the fireplace. Did you really work in acquisitions? I led the team that purchased and restored the Harbor Exchange District. Her husband stared at me. That was you. It was a team. I directed the transaction. Adrian rolled his eyes. This is irrelevant. It is relevant. Marissa said, You told us your relationship with the Ashfords came entirely through you. Adrian's patience broke. My relationship with Graham came through me. He respected my ability. My father finally stepped away from the door. I tolerated you because Victoria loved you. The sentence landed without volume and without mercy. Adrian's face tightened. My father continued. You submitted 3 proposals to my company before your marriage. All 3 were rejected because the numbers were poor. After you married my daughter, I gave your consulting firm 2 small contracts at her request. You missed deadlines on both. Victoria completed the corrective work and asked that her name be removed so you would not be embarrassed. Adrian looked at me as though my silence had betrayed him. You told him he already knew. You let me believe I let you tell your own story. That distinction mattered. I had not created Adrian's arrogance. I had stopped interrupting it. Mara Ellis approached me quietly. We found an inconsistency in the items from the portfolio, she said. The listing package references an original appraisal, a second trustee authorization, and a blue-bound due diligence book. None is here. Where would Lydia keep them? Lydia heard the question. I do not have them. Adrian's gaze flicked toward the service corridor. That was enough. I looked at Mrs. Alvarez. Has anyone entered the East office tonight? She checked the security tablet. The door opened at 7:14 with Mr. Mercer's code. It opened again at 9:32. Who used it the second time? The camera was disabled. Adrian's hand moved toward the inside pocket of his jacket. Mara saw it. Mr. Mercer. Please remove your hand slowly. He laughed. I am reaching for a handkerchief. Use the outside pocket. He did not. My father's security director, Thomas Reed, stepped between Adrian and the corridor. Reed was not a bodyguard in the theatrical sense. He was a former federal investigator in his 60s who wore bifocals and spoke like an accountant. Adrian, he said. The secondary phone. The color left Adrian's face. What phone? The one in your inside left pocket. Adrian looked at me. You searched me. No. I said, You have been touching it every time someone mentions the missing documents. He pulled out a small black phone and held it up. It is a private business device. Mara extended an evidence bag. Do not unlock it. Place it inside. I do not consent. You are not required to consent to a voluntary surrender. But the preservation order identifies all devices used in connection with Alder Vale. If you refuse, I will document that refusal and seek a seizure warrant. Adrian looked toward the front windows. Snow had covered the tire tracks from the motorcade. The estate was silent beyond the glass. He seemed to understand that running would only make the scene complete. He placed the phone in the bag. Mrs. Alvarez handed me the East office key. I did not give it to my father. I took Caroline, Mara, and Mrs. Alvarez with me. Adrian was permitted to follow at a distance with Reed. We crossed the Great Hall and entered the corridor behind the staircase. The East office had once been my mother's flower room. Adrian converted it into a private workspace and installed a lock without asking the trust. I rarely entered. The walls were covered with development maps. Architectural renderings of the Vermont resort stood on easels. A model of the planned clubhouse occupied the center table. Behind the desk, one cabinet door stood open. The blue due diligence book was missing. So was the original appraisal. On the floor lay a narrow trail of water from melted snow. The footprints did not lead toward the front door. They led to the old passage behind the bookcase. Wintermere had been built in stages. The earliest section contained service passages used when staff were expected to move unseen. Most had been sealed during renovation. One remained behind the east office shelves and connected to the conservatory, then to a side entrance near the garages. Adrian had discovered it years earlier. He once called it the perfect escape route from boring dinners. I touched the edge of the bookcase. The hidden latch was warm. Someone had used it minutes before the motorcade arrived. Mara called the team outside. Mrs. Alvarez checked the garage cameras. One vehicle is missing, she said. The gray Range Rover. Who's Ms. Vale arrived in it. Lydia had been inside the library when we found her portfolio, which meant someone else had taken her car. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second. Who has the documents? I asked. He opened them. No one. Who left through the passage? I do not know. Then you will not mind if the gate cameras identify them. Mara's radio crackled. A security officer at the lower gate reported that the Range Rover had tried to exit 6 minutes earlier. The gate did not open because the trust had suspended all guest vehicle access after my call. The driver abandoned the vehicle near the old orchard and continued on foot toward the county road. The officer had seen a man carrying a blue case. Adrian's project accountant, Felix Grant, was no longer in the house. The missing documents had just become a chase through the snow. Mara did not allow half the guests to turn the search into entertainment. She closed the East office, assigned one investigator to the abandoned Range Rover, and asked estate security to preserve the gate recordings. Thomas Reed took 2 members of my father's team toward the orchard, not to chase Felix through the trees, but to keep him from reaching the county road before local police arrived. Adrian objected immediately. Felix is an employee, he said. He may have taken confidential material for safekeeping. Then he can explain that while returning it. Mara replied. He has anxiety. A police confrontation could traumatize him. I looked at Adrian. You sent a man into a snowstorm carrying forged documents. And now you are worried about his comfort. I did not send anyone. Your second phone will answer that. For the next 20 minutes, no one knew what Felix would do. The uncertainty altered the atmosphere more than the legal announcements had. Guests who had treated the party as scandal began recognizing that they might be connected to a serious fraud. Investors called spouses. Lawyers were awakened. One man sat alone beneath the library window calculating on a napkin how much of his retirement money had already left his account. I walked to the kitchen. I needed distance from Adrian's voice and from the expression on my father's face each time he looked at the bruise on my arm. The staff had gathered near the pantry. Some were frightened they would lose their jobs. Others had seen enough of Adrian's behavior to understand why the house had erupted. Mrs. Alvarez followed me. I should have told you, she said. About what, Mr. Timel? Mercer, using the private rooms. Ms. Vale coming when you were away. The jewelry cabinet. You documented the access. I told myself that was enough. It may be the reason we recover everything. She shook her head. Your mother would have spoken sooner. My mother also spent 20 years pretending my grandfather's temper was merely old-fashioned. Mrs. Alvarez looked surprised. The past becomes elegant when everyone who suffered is too polite to describe it. I said. That was one reason I did not want the night simplified into a rich father rescuing his daughter. Money had given me tools many women did not have: attorneys, security archives, independent property, a bank that returned calls, a father waiting nearby. Yet I had still spent years translating control into patience and fear into marital compromise. Wealth did not make abuse impossible. It merely gave it better rooms. The kitchen door opened. My father entered alone. He closed the door behind him and stood across the work table from me. Without his entourage, he looked older. Snow had melted into the shoulders of his coat. You knew he had grabbed you before, he said. It was not a question. I looked down at the bruise. Yes, How many times? Twice before tonight? Why did you not tell me? Because you would have arrived exactly as you arrived tonight. And that would have been wrong. It would have been your decision. His jaw tightened. He put his hands on you. And I needed to be the person who ended it. You nearly let him mortgage your mother's house. I stopped the loan. After he applied. Because that is when the bank notified me. My father turned away and gripped the edge of the counter. For most of my childhood, he solved problems before I knew they existed. After my mother died, his protection hardened into management. He booked my travel, screened my advisors, rejected invitations, and considered any disagreement evidence that someone else was influencing me. Marrying Adrian had been, in part, an escape from that control. I had left one man who believed protection entitled him to decide for me, and chosen another who believed marriage entitled him to own me. The forms were different. The erasure felt similar. Dad, I said. I called because I needed the documents. The bank. And the witnesses. I did not call for permission. He looked at me. I know. Do you? A long silence passed between us. Then he removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and placed it on the table between us. Your knee is bleeding again, he said. I pressed the cloth to the cut. He did not touch me without asking. It was a small thing, but it told me he had heard more than my words. I should have trusted you sooner, he said. I should have told you sooner. Both can be true. That was the first honest conversation we had managed in years. Mara's radio sounded from the hall. Felix had been found beside the lower stone wall, soaked, exhausted, and holding the blue case beneath his coat. He had not resisted. He claimed Adrian instructed him to take the documents to a private courier waiting at a gas station. When police searched the Range Rover with Lydia's consent, they found a portable document shredder, 2 empty gasoline cans, a package of blank notary seals, and a one-way airline itinerary in Felix's name for the following morning. Adrian listened to the report without expression. Lydia did not. She stood so quickly, her chair struck the wall. You were going to burn the files, she demanded. Adrian looked at her. You brought the shredder. For routine client disposal. The gasoline was for the snowblower. In my car, you told Felix to use it. Lydia moved toward him. You said the original documents would be held by your lawyer. Lower your voice. You sent an accountant to destroy the only papers proving you told me the trust transfer was legitimate. Adrian's face changed into the same cold mask he used on me. You were the broker. You prepared the listing. Do not pretend you were an innocent assistant. I relied on your representations. You slept in my house and stole my wife's jewelry. You gave me the key. They had reached the stage where lovers become witnesses. Caroline separated them and asked Mara whether Lydia wished to make a formal statement. Lydia looked at the attorney who had finally arrived to represent her. A sharp young woman named Priya Desai. Priya spoke to her in a whisper, then asked for a private room. I granted them the small blue parlor. Adrian demanded the same privilege. Caroline directed him to the billiard room with his newly arrived counsel. Within minutes, the house had divided into islands of negotiation. I returned to the library. Roland sat alone now. Celeste had gone upstairs under escort to collect medication and a change of shoes. Marissa was speaking quietly with her husband near the fire. Roland gestured toward the chair opposite him. May I ask you something? I sat. How long have you known about the affair? 4 months. About the property plan. 36 hours. He closed his eyes. 4 months. I found hotel receipts. Then messages. And you said nothing. I asked Adrian directly. He told me I was paranoid. Roland rubbed both hands over his face. I taught him that. I waited. When Adrian was 15, he said, he stole money from my desk? I knew he did it. He knew I knew. But I let him blame the housekeeper because your mother-in-law was terrified of scandal. The housekeeper was fired. Did you ever correct it? No. Did you compensate her? No. Then you taught him that another person's life was an acceptable price for preserving his image. Roland looked toward the dark windows. I thought protecting a child meant preventing consequences. So did I. For too long. He nodded once. He told me the trust was moving Wintermere into both your names as part of an estate plan. I wanted to believe him because I had borrowed against my own home to invest. How much? $2 million. Marissa overheard. Dead. He did not look at her. Celeste returned from upstairs at that moment, carrying a small case. When she learned the amount, she nearly dropped it. You mortgaged our house, Roland's silence answered. The Mercer family had spent the evening laughing, while Adrian placed me outside my own home. Now they understood that he had been preparing to take theirs as well. Celeste turned toward her son, who had emerged from the billiard room with his attorney. You told us the money was guaranteed. Adrian's lawyer tried to interrupt, but Celeste pushed past him. You said Graham had signed. I said the Ashford relationship supported the project. You showed us a letter. A preliminary letter. His signature was forged. I did not personally create it. Did you know? Adrian stared at his mother. Celeste's voice cracked. Did you know? He answered with a question. Do you want the project to survive or not? That was Adrian's truest belief. If the promised reward was large enough, fraud became courage. Celeste stepped back as though he had struck her. Lydia's attorney emerged from the blue parlor. Ms. Vale is prepared to provide a statement and access to her business records in exchange for written confirmation that the trust will not pursue a civil theft claim regarding items she returns voluntarily tonight. Caroline looked at me. The jewelry on the hall table included my mother's locket. I wanted Lydia charged for touching it, wearing it, placing it in a portfolio as though grief were inventory. But the documents she held could identify every investor, every false representation, and every transfer. What else does she have? I asked. Priya replied. Email archives, recorded calls, draft agreements, and a cloud folder created by Mr. Mercer. She also has information concerning a separate loan secured by property belonging to his parents. Celeste made a sound behind us. Adrian's attorney said, This is extortion. Priya did not look at him. It is cooperation. I considered the offer. Returning stolen property does not erase the theft. I said, but I will agree that the trust's civil claim will focus on losses not fully restored. I cannot control criminal investigators, the bank, or other victims. Priya nodded. That is acceptable. Lydia returned to the library without the confidence she had carried at dinner. She did not apologize. I did not require a performance of remorse to recognize the value of evidence. She unlocked her phone and opened a hidden cloud account. The first file was titled Wintermere Transition. It contained a calendar. January, complete financing. February, file separation petition. March, remove Victoria from estate for medical rest. April, private sale. Beside the March entry, Adrian had written use concern, not hostility. Family witnesses essential. The anniversary party had not been a spontaneous humiliation. It was step 3. The second file contained a draft letter from a psychiatrist Adrian had never met, describing me as emotionally volatile and incapable of managing complex property decisions. The third contained photographs of prescription bottles from my bathroom, cropped to make ordinary sleep medication appear like evidence of dependency. The fourth contained a proposed statement for Celeste, Roland, Marissa, and 6 party guests to sign after the event. It said they had witnessed me threaten Adrian, attack Lydia, and leave the house voluntarily during a mental health episode. Several of those 6 guests were still in the library. One began to cry. Another said, "He asked me to sign something after dinner. He said it was an anniversary tribute." Adrian's plan had not failed because he lost his temper. His violence was part of the plan. What he had not expected was the doorbell camera, the bank alert, or the fact that the woman he described as weak had spent 36 hours arranging for truth to arrive on schedule. I looked at him across the room. "You did not throw me outside because you were angry." I said, "You threw me outside because you needed witnesses to say I left." His attorney touched his sleeve, warning him not to answer. Adrian answered anyway. "You would never have survived a public fight." I did not need to fight. "No," he said bitterly. "You called your father." I held his gaze. I called for the documents. Behind me. The printer began producing page after page from Lydia's cloud archive. The sound was soft, mechanical, and relentless. It sounded like a lock changing. By midnight, the anniversary party had become an evidence conference. The dining room remained untouched. Plates cooled beneath silver covers. My mother's chair stood empty at the head of the table. Snow pressed against the windows, and every few minutes, wind shook the old glass hard enough to make the candles tremble. Guests left in small groups after speaking with the bank team. Some avoided me because shame had made eye contact difficult. Others apologized with the urgency of people who wanted forgiveness before they understood the damage. "Doctor." Harmon took both my hands. "I laughed when he moved your place card." He said, "I am sorry. You invested because you trusted a guarantee that did not exist. Focus on preserving your records." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give tonight." He nodded and left. A woman named Beth Klein, who had filmed Adrian dragging me, transferred the original video to Caroline's secure drive. She admitted Lydia had asked her earlier in the week to capture Victoria's inevitable breakdown for a private family record. I thought she was exaggerating. Beth said, "I thought it was gossip. You still positioned yourself near the door." Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, I did not comfort her. Remorse is necessary, but it is not the same as repair. At 12:20, local police confirmed Felix had surrendered the blue case. Inside were the original appraisal, the forged trustee certificate, the private investor list, and a handwritten set of instructions from Adrian. The final line read, "If stopped, say Victoria authorized emergency transport." Mara photographed the page and placed it in an evidence sleeve. Adrian's lawyer stopped allowing him to speak. That did not stop Adrian from watching me. Each time I moved through the house, I felt his attention following. For 12 years, he had used observation as ownership. He knew which conversations exhausted me, which rooms I entered when anxious, which memories of my mother weakened my resolve. He believed intimacy gave him a permanent map of my limits. He did not understand that limits can move. At 1 a.m, Caroline handed him the written termination notice. It allowed him 20 minutes, under escort, to collect medication, identification, and clothing for 48 hours. All other belongings would be inventoried and transferred later through counsel. Adrian read the first page. "You are evicting me without my property. You are being removed from trust property after documented violence and fraud." Caroline said, "Your personal possessions remain yours. My office files are mine. Items unrelated to the investigation will be returned. My wine collection will be inventoried. The car in the east garage, registered to the trust. The watches in the bedroom safe. If they are yours and lawfully acquired, they will be released after inventory." He looked at me. "This is what you wanted. You wanted to strip me in front of everyone. I wanted you to stop using my home and my name as collateral. You could have handled that privately. You designed the party as evidence against me. Do not complain that it became evidence against you. His attorney whispered something. Adrian crumpled the notice but did not tear it. Celeste approached me before leaving. Her makeup had blurred around her eyes. Without the posture of authority, she looked like a tired woman, trapped inside expensive fabric. "May Roland and I stay until the roads improve?" she asked. "Yes. The south guest rooms are available. Security will escort you. You will leave at 8 in the morning." Her lips parted, perhaps expecting cruelty or absolution. I offered neither. "Thank you," she said. Marissa and her husband chose to leave with a hired driver. Before she went, she paused near the door. I should have stopped him. Yes. I was afraid he would turn on me. He did anyway. "He took your investment." She flinched. "I do not know how to fix any of this." "Start by giving the bank every message you have." She nodded and walked into the snow. Lydia left with her attorney after signing a property return inventory. She surrendered the jewelry, the listing database, 2 storage unit keys, and access credentials for the cloud archive. Mara did not arrest her that night. The evidence required review, and Lydia's cooperation changed the immediate calculation. She exited through the front door, not the staff entrance, because I did not need a symbolic humiliation to understand what she had done. At the threshold, she turned to me. "He said you did not love him." "That was not permission. He said your marriage had been over for years. Then he was free to file for divorce. He said the house would be his. You wanted that to be true." Her face hardened. "You think you are better because your family owned it first?" "No. I think ownership is proven by documents, and character is proven by what you do when you believe someone else has less power." She left without answering. Adrian was the last. He came downstairs carrying 1 suitcase. Thomas Reed followed with an inventory sheet. Adrian had changed from his tuxedo into dark trousers and a cashmere coat I had given him for his 40th birthday. The bruise on my arm had deepened to purple. He stopped beneath our wedding portrait. The photograph had always been too large. Adrian chose it because the estate photographer captured Wintermere behind us. He said it made our marriage look historic. "Do you remember that day?" he asked. "I remember my mother being too sick to stand through the ceremony." "That is not what I asked." "I remember believing you." His expression softened. For a moment, he became the man who once brought coffee to my mother's hospital room and slept in a chair beside me. I had spent years wondering which version was real. Both were. A person can offer tenderness and still choose control. Good memories do not acquit later harm. That truth was harder than calling him a monster, because monsters are easy to leave. Human beings arrive with history, promises, apologies, and mornings when they make you laugh. Adrian lowered his voice. "Call off the bank review. Let Caroline restructure the trust. I will end things with Lydia. We can tell everyone's stress caused a misunderstanding. You forged my signature." I panicked. "You planned to declare me unstable." "That was the lawyer's strategy. You photographed my medication." "Lydia did that." "You instructed Felix to remove the original documents." "I was protecting the project." "You threw me into the snow." His eyes flashed. "You embarrassed me in my own house." There it was again. Not remorse. Ownership. I stepped aside from the door. "This was never your house." He moved closer, though Reed immediately shifted between us. Adrian looked over Reed's shoulder. "You will regret turning your father loose. He will own every decision you make from now on." My father brought documents because I asked. You brought witnesses because you planned to erase me. You think those are different? Yes. How I can tell my father to leave? I turned toward the hall. Dad. My father looked up from a conversation with Caroline. Go home, I said. The room became still. My father studied me. Then he buttoned his coat. Call me when you are ready, he said. No argument. No wounded performance. He walked out with 2 members of his team, leaving the attorney, bank officer, and investigators because their work was not his to control. Adrian watched the door close behind him. I looked back at my husband. That is the difference. He had no answer. Reed escorted him to a waiting car. Adrian did not run to the door, as the thumbnail version of the story might suggest. He walked slowly, preserving whatever dignity he imagined remained. But before entering the car, he looked up at Wintermere's lit windows. For the first time, he was seeing the house from outside. The car carried him to a hotel owned by no one in my family. At 2:15 in the morning, the doors closed. Mrs. Alvarez asked whether I wanted the locks changed immediately. Not just the locks. I said, every code. GATA credential. Remote access token. Staff authorization. And vendor password. She nodded. Before sunrise, I walked through the quiet house after the last investigator left. The dining table remained set for a celebration that had never happened. Lydia's crossed-out place card sat on my mother's chair. I picked it up and tore it once through the middle, not in rage, but because no artifact from that performance deserved preservation. Then I removed my wet dress, cleaned the cut on my knee, and sat in the morning room until dawn. At 5:40, the first locksmith arrived. At 6:10, the digital access system deleted Adrian's profile. At 6:32, a notification appeared on my phone. Adrian Mercer credential revoked. The message was ordinary. No music. No witnesses. No motorcade. It was the true ending of the night. But it was not the end of the story. At 7:14, while the locksmith replaced the final cylinder, an alarm sounded from the trust's financial dashboard. Someone had attempted to transfer $9 million from the Aldervale escrow account to an offshore bank in the British Virgin Islands. The authorization came from Adrian's second phone. The transfer request had been scheduled before he left Wintermere, and it carried my forged approval. The transfer failed because North Atlantic Bank had already placed the Aldervale accounts under enhanced review. Failure did not make it harmless. At 7:30, Daniel Cho returned to Wintermere with 2 forensic analysts and a printed transaction log. He had not slept. Neither had I. The staff served coffee in the morning room while snowplows cleared the driveway outside. The request entered the system at 7:14. Daniel said, "It was pre-authorized at 11:58 last night and scheduled to release after a secondary authentication window. Whose credentials were used, Mr. Mercer's and yours? I never had access to the Aldervale account. You were added as an emergency guarantor 3 weeks ago." He placed a form in front of me. The document showed a digital signature, a copy of my driver's license, and security questions answered, with details only someone close to me would know: the hospital where my mother died, the name of my first school, the street where I lived during college. Adrian had not merely forged my handwriting. He had used our marriage as an identity file. The destination account belonged to North Star Advisory Holdings, registered through an offshore service. Lydia's cloud archive contained no reference to it. Felix claimed he had never heard of it. Adrian's attorney said his client would not answer questions without a formal subpoena. I read the transfer instructions twice. Who benefits from North Star? We do not know yet. Daniel said, "The ownership chain runs through 2 nominee directors. My father called while we were reviewing the log. I heard about the transfer. He said, my team can identify the account within an hour. North Atlantic is already tracing it. My team has better access. Dad, I am offering resources. I know. Send any relevant public or lawfully obtained information to Caroline. Do not contact the offshore bank directly. Victoria. $9 million was nearly stolen using your identity. And I am not going to compromise the investigation because Ashford Property Holdings can move faster. Silence. A day earlier. He might have treated my refusal as pride. This time he said, "Understood." That single word mattered more than a grand apology. By noon, Daniel's analysts found a connection. One of Northstar's nominee directors also appeared on the corporate filing for a private medical retreat in Switzerland. The retreat had received a reservation deposit for 2 guests, beginning 48 hours after the party. The names on the reservation were false. The passport numbers were not. They belonged to Adrian and Lydia. When Caroline presented the information to Lydia's attorney, Lydia reacted with genuine shock. Adrian had told her they would leave for Montreal after completing the Wintermere transaction, then spend several months arranging the Vermont development from Canada. She knew nothing about Switzerland. The second traveler named on the reservation was not Lydia. It was Claire Dunning, Adrian's 27-year-old project coordinator. The affair I had discovered was not the only affair. Lydia sat in Caroline's office at Wintermere and stared at the reservation confirmation for nearly a minute. "He told me Claire was incompetent," she said. "He also told you I was unstable," I replied. "He said she was being terminated. He prepared to leave the country with her." Lydia's humiliation did not satisfy me. It revealed a pattern. Adrian did not form partnerships. He built ladders out of people and kicked each one away after climbing. Priya Desai advised Lydia to expand her cooperation. Within hours, she disclosed another storage location in Stamford where Adrian kept investor gifts, backup devices, and unsigned property papers. A court-authorized preservation of the unit. Investigators found 12 luxury watches purchased through project accounts, 6 sealed envelopes of cash, multiple passports, and a portable hard drive wrapped in aluminum foil. The drive contained the internal ledger. Adrian had raised almost $27 million from friends, relatives, and private investors. Less than $6 million had been spent on legitimate planning, land options, engineering, and permits. More than $8 million had funded personal expenses, travel, vehicles, club dues, jewelry, and payments to Lydia's brokerage. $9 million had been positioned for the offshore transfer. The remainder had been moved between companies to create the appearance of active development. The Vermont project was not entirely imaginary. That made it more dangerous. There were real land contracts, real architects, and real approvals in progress. Adrian had built enough substance around the fraud to make reasonable people doubt their instincts. The ledger also showed payments to a reputation management company. Its task was labeled Victoria Containment. The company had drafted anonymous posts describing me as unstable, addicted to medication, resentful of Adrian's success, and estranged from my father. It had prepared photographs of me leaving a clinic after my mother's death, falsely captioned as recent psychiatric treatment. It had created a list of journalists who might publish a story after the anniversary party. The plan was to release the narrative the morning after I was removed from Wintermere. If the motorcade had not arrived, the internet would have awakened to a carefully manufactured version of my life. I would have been the wealthy, irrational wife who attacked her husband's business partner and fled her own party. Adrian would have expressed concern. Lydia would have asked for privacy. Anonymous sources would have said my behavior had deteriorated for months. By the time I produced the trust documents, the emotional story would have traveled farther than the legal correction. I asked the investigators to preserve every draft. Then I did something Adrian had never expected. I did not respond publicly. For 3 days. Reporters called. Video of him pushing me spread online because guests had recorded it. But I issued only one statement through Caroline. The events at Wintermere involve private family matters and active financial investigations. I will not litigate facts through rumor. Verified documents will be provided through appropriate legal channels. Adrian responded with a 12-minute video from his hotel suite. He sat before a fireplace, wore an open-collared shirt, and described himself as a husband devastated by his wife's weaponization of inherited power. He said I had coordinated an ambush with my father because I was jealous of his successful partnership with Lydia. He called the push an accident. He denied forging anything. He said the motorcade proved I had planned to humiliate him. The video received hundreds of thousands of views. Commentators divided into teams. Some called me brave. Others called me a billionaire's daughter, destroying a self-made man. Amateur experts analyzed my body language in the doorbell footage. Strangers decided whether I was abused, manipulative, cold, spoiled, strategic, or secretly controlling. I watched none of it after the first hour. Instead, I met with the investors. We held the meeting in a rented municipal auditorium, not at Wintermere and not at an Ashford property. That choice was deliberate. I did not want the room itself to argue for my credibility. Each investor received a timeline, bank instructions, contact information for independent counsel, and a summary distinguishing confirmed losses from frozen funds. My father offered to reimburse everyone immediately. I refused. If Ashford money covers the losses before the forensic work is complete, Adrian will claim the investors were never harmed. I told him, it may also allow people who ignored obvious warnings to avoid examining why they trusted him. They could lose homes. Then we establish an emergency bridge fund with independent administration and repayment rights tied to recovered assets. That is slower. It is accountable. He studied the proposal, then agreed. The bridge fund prevented foreclosures and medical hardship without erasing the claims. It was financed by a temporary loan from the family foundation, overseen by an outside committee, and available to investors based on need rather than social connection. Roland qualified because the loan against his home was approaching default. He accepted assistance through the same process as everyone else. Celeste hated that. She called me privately. You are making us fill out hardship forms like strangers. You invested in a private development without speaking to me. The fund is independent. We are family. Family status did not protect me from being thrown outside. She became quiet. Then she asked, Is Adrian going to prison? I do not know. You do know. Your father knows judges. My father will not contact a judge. You expect me to believe that I expect you to decide whether you will provide investigators with the voicemail, emails, and statements Adrian asked you to sign. If I cooperate, I betray my son. If you lie, you betray every person whose money he took. She began to cry. For once, I did not rush to rescue her from the meaning of her choices. The next morning, Celeste delivered a box to Caroline's office. It contained printed emails, drafts of the false witness statement, and a handwritten note Adrian had given her before the party. The note instructed her to tell guests I had been fragile since Eleanor's death and that my father had considered medical intervention. At the bottom, Adrian had written, "Keep the message loving. Concern is more credible than anger." Celeste included a signed statement, acknowledging she had agreed to participate. It was the first honest act I had seen from her. It did not erase the laughter through the window, but repair begins after truth, never before it. 1 week after the party, the State Fraud Unit executed search warrants at Adrian's hotel room, office, and storage unit. They seized devices, financial records, false seals, and the remaining cash. Adrian was not arrested that morning. Investigations move more slowly than revenge stories. Evidence must be authenticated. Accounts must be traced. Each defendant must have counsel. Every shortcut creates a future argument. Adrian used the delay to call me. The number was blocked, but I recognized the rhythm of his breathing before he spoke. Victoria, you should contact Caroline. I am calling my wife. You are calling a witness. I need 5 minutes. I should have ended the call. Instead, I recorded it through the legal system Caroline had installed and said, "Speak." He sounded exhausted. "Claire is gone." I said nothing. She took money and disappeared. The transfer was blocked. She had access to another account. Then tell investigators. You think this is funny? No. I lost everything. You still have legal representation. A hotel room. Clothing. And the opportunity to tell the truth. You took my home. You never owned it. You keep saying that as though paper is more real than 12 years. Paper recorded the boundary you decided did not apply to you. We built a life there. We lived a life there. You tried to sell it. He breathed heavily into the phone. I loved you. The words reached a place in me that had not yet frozen. I believe you did. Sometimes. I said. Then help me. Love is not immunity. Your father has always wanted me gone. My father did not forge my signature. I can make this right. How I will return what I can. I will admit the Lydia relationship. We can separate privately. You can keep Wintermere. I almost laughed at the final offer. You are offering me my own house. I am trying to preserve what remains. What remains is evidence. His voice hardened. If I go down, your father goes with me. I waited. There are documents on the drive. He said. Old Ashford permits. Payments. Safety reports. Your father buried problems years ago to protect the company. I copied everything. That was the hook he had saved for the moment. Sympathy failed. Send the documents to investigators. I said. You do not know what they contain. Neither do you. Or you would be specific. I know enough. Then stop using truth as a threat and disclose it. You would destroy your own father. No. If he committed wrongdoing, his choices would damage him. Adrian was silent. He had expected family loyalty to mean concealment because that was how his family operated. He could not understand that I would not protect my father through lies. Just as I would not protect my husband through silence. You are colder than I thought. He said. No. I am finally consistent. I ended the call and sent the recording to Caroline. Then I called my father. Adrian says he has evidence of old Ashford violations. My father did not dismiss it. Which projects he did not say. There were environmental disputes in the 90s and a contractor bribery case before you joined the company. We disclosed what we found. But I cannot promise no one concealed something. Will you authorize an independent review? He hesitated. Yes. That answer changed the next year of both our lives. The independent review began with a locked room and 6 boxes no one had opened in 20 years. My father appointed a retired judge to supervise it. Caroline chose an environmental lawyer with no prior relationship to Ashford Property Holdings. The family company agreed in writing to disclose findings to regulators and waive confidentiality for records connected to public safety. Adrian's threat contained a piece of truth. In 1998, an Ashford subsidiary purchased an industrial parcel beside a river in upstate New York. Soil tests identified chemical contamination from the prior owner. A project executive delayed filing one report while negotiating liability coverage. The delay lasted 11 weeks. During that period, construction workers entered part of the site without complete protective equipment. My father had not ordered the delay. He had learned about it later and fired the executive. But he had accepted a settlement agreement that kept the internal timeline confidential. The company paid for cleanup and medical monitoring. Yet the workers were never told how long management had known about the report. Legally, the matter had been resolved. Morally, it remained unfinished. My father sat across from me in Wintermere's morning room after the review team presented the finding. He looked at my mother's desk rather than at me. I told myself the cleanup was what mattered. He said, "The lawyers said reopening the timeline would create claims without changing the medical care. Did the workers have the right to know?" "Yes." "Then why did you agree to secrecy?" "Because the company was carrying debt. A public scandal could have cost thousands of jobs. That is the explanation." He looked at me. Not the excuse, no. The old version of my father might have defended the decision until the room surrendered. The man who had left Wintermere when I asked him to leave did something else. He authorized notification to every affected worker or surviving family. The company established a new compensation process, disclosed the delayed report to regulators, and released the internal timeline. He resigned from 2 committee positions while the board reviewed his conduct. The financial cost was significant. The cost to his reputation was greater. Adrian released selected pages online before the formal disclosure, hoping to create the appearance that he had exposed a secret empire. For 48 hours. Headlines treated him as a whistleblower. His supporters said the fraud case was retaliation by a corrupt family. Then the full report appeared, including the fact that Adrian had downloaded the files months earlier, never contacted regulators, and used them only after investigators found his forged documents. Truth did not absolve my father. Context did not absolve Adrian. Both facts remained in the same room. That distinction became central to my own public statement. I did not stand at Wintermere's gates or sit beside my father. I spoke at a community legal center that assisted victims of financial coercion. Behind me was a plain blue wall. My husband's evidence identified a real failure in my family's company. I said, "That failure is being disclosed and addressed. It does not make forged signatures authentic. It does not transform theft into investment. It does not make physical violence accidental. Accountability is not a family weapon. It is a standard. And it must apply to everyone, including the people I love." The statement lasted 4 minutes. It changed the public conversation because it refused the choice Adrian offered. I did not have to declare my father perfect to prove my husband dishonest. I did not have to defend a company's past to defend my own rights. I did not have to turn truth into loyalty. 2 days later, Claire Dunning was arrested at an airport in Lisbon. She had used a separate Aldervale account to transfer $600,000 and purchased a new identity package through an online intermediary. The offshore account linked to Northstar contained funds from 3 investors and payments from a title company Lydia had used. Claire's lawyer quickly began negotiating cooperation. Her records revealed the final layer of Adrian's plan. Wintermere was not intended to remain sold. A private buyer connected to Northstar would purchase the estate through a shell company for $42 million. After the transaction closed and the trust challenge began, the buyer would lease the house back to another Adrian-controlled company. The sale proceeds would disappear into the Vermont project and offshore accounts. By the time a court reversed the fraudulent transfer, the money would be gone, and the shell buyer would claim to have relied on valid documents. The proposed buyer was a fund managed by Adrian's oldest friend, Conrad Pike. Conrad had attended the anniversary party. He had stood near the window while Adrian pushed me into the snow. He was also the man who raised his phone first. Investigators recovered messages showing that Conrad filmed the incident to support the mental health narrative. In return, he expected an ownership share in Wintermere after the sale. When questioned, he claimed he believed the transfer was legal. The draft purchase agreement included a handwritten note from him: "Make sure wife is documented as unstable before close." He was charged alongside Adrian months later. The case expanded slowly. Search warrants became indictments. Indictments became motions. Lydia cooperated and pleaded to fraud-related offenses. Felix admitted he had followed Adrian's instruction to remove and destroy documents. Claire returned to the United States under an agreement. Conrad fought every allegation. Adrian fought hardest. He filed for divorce and demanded half the value of Wintermere. Despite the trust, he claimed an equitable interest based on 12 years of management and enhancement. He presented photographs of himself directing gardeners and roldalos as roldalos and raidenaniers, selecting wine, and standing beside contractors. Our attorneys presented invoices showing the trust paid every employee and project. Mrs. Alvarez testified that Adrian frequently posed for photographs after work was completed. A landscape architect produced an email in which Adrian asked staff to delay planting until a magazine photographer arrived so he could be seen holding plans. The family court rejected his property claim. He then demanded compensation for the increase in the estate's value during marriage. Independent appraisers showed that most appreciation came from market changes and restoration funded before the wedding. The court awarded him his documented personal property and a limited temporary support amount while criminal proceedings continued. He called the result theft. I called it accounting. The divorce itself did not feel triumphant. I signed the final papers at a conference table while rain moved down the windows. Adrian appeared by video from his lawyer's office. He had lost weight. His hair had grayed near the temples. For 12 years I had known every expression on his face. Now the screen made him look both familiar and unreachable. The judge asked whether the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yes, I said. Adrian paused before answering. Yes? That was all. No orchestra stopped. No executives stood. No one applauded. A marriage ended with 2 syllables and electronic signatures. Afterward, I sat in my car for 20 minutes and cried, not because I wanted him back, but because freedom does not retroactively make the prison imaginary. I grieved the mornings when we were kind, the plans we had made, the children we once discussed and never had, the version of myself who believed endurance was proof of devotion. Then I drove home. Wintermere no longer felt like victory. It felt enormous. Rooms that once held staff, guests, and Adrian's endless events became silent. I walked from the library to the dining room and heard only my own steps. My mother's chair remained at the head of the table, but I stopped sitting in it. The chair had become too tangled with inheritance, expectation, and the image of Lydia raising champagne. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez found me covering it with a linen cloth. "Are you putting it in storage?" she asked. "I do not know. Your mother loved that chair. She loved people more." That sentence became the beginning of Wintermere's next life. During the months of legal proceedings, I spent time at a support center in Stamford. I began as a donor and quickly learned how little money solved without systems. Women leaving controlling marriages often needed more than emergency shelter. They needed a safe address, legal representation, childcare, transportation, document recovery, financial accounts, technology security, and time to make decisions without someone monitoring every movement. One evening, a woman named Rosa described sleeping in her car with 2 children because the shelter could not accept her teenage son. We had a place for 3 nights, she said. Then the motel voucher ended. My husband had canceled my cards and told the school I was unstable. The word unstable landed differently now. I looked at the unused guest wing of Wintermere in my mind. The estate had 12 bedrooms, a separate carriage house, staff apartments, a commercial kitchen, secure gates, and enough privacy that residents would not be photographed entering. The trust prohibited sale and mortgage, but it allowed charitable residential use with trustee approval. I brought the idea to my father. He did not say yes immediately. That was progress. He asked about security, zoning, staffing, privacy, insurance, governance, and whether transforming my home during an active case might expose residents to media attention. Each question was valid. I formed a planning group led by shelter professionals, not family executives. We met with neighbors, domestic violence advocates, disability specialists, and former residents of transitional programs. The first proposal was rejected. It was too institutional. It treated women as recipients rather than decision-makers. We rewrote it. The second proposal created a 9-month transitional residence with private family suites, legal offices in the former billiard room, a child care center in the East Wing, independent financial coaching, and partnerships with local employers. Residents would control their schedules and visitors within safety protocols. No one would be required to tell her story to donors. No gala would display their faces. The project was named Eleanor House, not after my family's wealth, but after my mother's belief that hospitality meant making room without demanding gratitude. The trust approved it unanimously. Renovation began 6 months after the party. The first thing we changed was the front door system. Every resident received her own credential. No spouse, parent, donor, or staff member could revoke it alone. Access changes required 2 authorized professionals and a documented safety reason. The system recorded every action. The second thing we changed was the dining room. We removed the single chair at the head of the table. The walnut chair with carved roses was restored and placed in a quiet reading alcove beside my mother's photograph. The new dining room used round tables. No seat belonged to one person. No guest could be moved to the edge as a message. When Celeste learned about Eleanor House, she asked to visit. I agreed to meet her before residents moved in. She walked through the renovated East Wing slowly. The old guest bedrooms had become family suites with kitchenettes and lockable document cabinets. The office Adrian once used to plan the fraudulent transfer had become a legal clinic room. Celeste stopped there. I helped him, she said. Yes, I told myself I was protecting my family. You were protecting the version of the family that gave you status. She accepted that without argument. I am testifying at his trial. I heard. He will never forgive me. Accountability is not something he has to forgive you for. She looked around the room. May I donate money? Yes. Anonymous donations go through the Independent Foundation. No room names, plaques, or access. A trace of her old offense appeared, then faded. Understood. She later donated the proceeds from selling several pieces of jewelry. It did not purchase absolution. It paid for child care. Roland sold the club membership and the car he could no longer afford. He repaid part of the bridge fund loan after recovering money from the frozen Aldervale accounts. Marissa and her husband provided full testimony and rebuilt their finances without asking me to rescue them. My relationship with them did not become warm. It became honest enough to remain distant. There are endings more realistic than reconciliation. There are boundaries kinder than pretending. Adrian's criminal trial began 14 months after the winter party. By then, online interest had mostly moved elsewhere. That was a relief. Real cases are not designed for continuous suspense. They involve delays, scheduling conferences, evidentiary motions, expert reports, and long stretches when nothing visible happens. The people harmed still wake up each morning. They still answer creditors, attend therapy, replace passwords, and explain to children why a familiar adult is no longer allowed near the house. The indictment charged Adrian with wire fraud, bankfraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted money laundering, document falsification, and offenses related to the investor scheme. Conrad Pike faced overlapping charges. Claire and Felix testified under cooperation agreements. Lydia had already entered a plea and agreed to testify. The assault at Wintermere was handled separately. Adrian pleaded to a reduced charge after the doorbell footage made a trial difficult to justify. The court imposed conditions that included no contact, counseling, and a permanent protective order. Some people criticized the result as too lenient. Others insisted the public humiliation had punished him enough. Neither opinion changed the bruise I had watched turn from purple to yellow. At the fraud trial, prosecutors did not begin with the snow. They began with the first false letter. A financial analyst placed Adrian's early fundraising documents on a screen and showed how references to Ashford-backed security became more specific over time. At first, the language was suggestive. Later, it became explicit. By the final investor round, Adrian was distributing forged guarantees, false trust certifications, and a fabricated appraisal. The progression mattered. It showed intent growing through success. Each time a lie worked, he made the next lie larger. Lydia testified for 2 days. She described the affair, the listing plan, the investor presentations, and the pressure to create a public narrative about my mental health. Adrian's lawyer attacked her credibility by listing every benefit she hoped to receive from cooperation. She answered, "I lied because I wanted the house and the money. I am telling the truth now because he was preparing to leave me with the evidence. It was not noble. It was believable." Felix testified that Adrian instructed him to remove the blue case and destroy the documents if the motorcade entered the property. Claire admitted scheduling the offshore transfer and planning to leave for Switzerland. Conrad's messages connected the proposed shell buyer to the false mental health narrative. My testimony lasted one morning. The prosecutor asked about the trust, the forged signature, the anniversary party, and Adrian's use of personal information to open financial access in my name. She did not ask me to describe every private cruelty. The case did not need my entire marriage. It needed facts. Adrian's attorney approached me carefully during cross-examination. "Mrs. Ashford, your father is an extremely powerful man." "Correct. He is wealthy and influential. And he disapproved of your husband." "Yes. He had the ability to mobilize attorneys, bankers, investigators, and security personnel within minutes. He had those people waiting because the bank had already identified forged documents, waiting for your husband to make a mistake, waiting to preserve evidence if he acted. You arranged a dramatic motorcade. My father selected the vehicles. I requested the documents. Did you know the arrival would humiliate Mr. Renation? Mercer. I knew the truth would contradict him in front of the people he had invited to witness a false story about me." The attorney paused. "You could have handled the property dispute privately. I could have terminated his residence when I found the bank application. I waited because his files showed a plan to use the party and its guests as evidence that I was unstable. Several investors were also scheduled to transfer money the next morning. So you allowed the confrontation. I allowed the party. He shows violence. Did you provoke him by asserting that the house was yours? Stating ownership is not provocation. You challenged his authority in front of guests. He had no authority to give my chair to his mistress. Remove me from the property. Forge my signature. Or mortgage the estate." The attorney changed direction. "Your father's company later admitted concealing part of an environmental timeline." Correct. Yes. So the Ashford family has also withheld truth when money was at stake. My father's company disclosed the failure, compensated affected workers, and submitted to review. That does not authenticate Adrian's documents. Is it your testimony that your family's wrongdoing is unrelated? It is related to the standard I apply. Facts remain facts, even when they are inconvenient to my side." The attorney looked toward the jury. He had hoped loyalty would make me defensive. Instead, the review of my father strengthened the point. Adrian never understood accountability was not revenge targeted at enemies. It was a rule that survived relationships. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They convicted Adrian on most counts and acquitted him on 2 lesser conspiracy allegations where the evidence did not establish his direct participation. Conrad was also convicted. The judge scheduled sentencing after restitution calculations, When the verdict was read, Adrian did not look at the jury. He looked at me. His expression contained anger, grief, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. For 12 years, he believed I would protect the marriage from consequences. At the party, he believed public pressure would make me surrender. During the investigation, he believed my father's past would make me choose secrecy. Every strategy depended on my silence. The verdict was the legal result of many people's work and of the Renton outers. It was not mine alone. Bank analysts stopped the transfer. Guests preserved video. Lydia, Felix, and Claire provided evidence for complicated reasons. Caroline built the document trail. Investigators followed procedures even when the internet demanded speed. Investors admitted how they had been deceived. My father disclosed facts that harmed him. No motorcade could have produced that outcome in 10 minutes. At sentencing, the court ordered imprisonment, restitution, and forfeiture of assets traced to the scheme, the recovered funds, insurance proceeds, and sale of Adrian's personal property returned a substantial portion of investor losses. The bridge fund absorbed some unrecoverable hardship. Not everyone became whole. Fraud rarely ends with perfect arithmetic. Adrian was permitted to speak. He described his ambition, his fear of failure, and the pressure of living near a family whose wealth made every achievement feel small. He apologized to investors. He apologized to his parents. He apologized to employees. He referred to what happened to me as the breakdown of our marriage. When the judge asked whether he wished to address the assault and identity theft directly, Adrian said, "I regret the way Victoria experienced those events. Even then, responsibility remained something that happened in other people's perception. I did not make a victim impact statement about revenge. I described consequences. I changed every lock in my home because my husband used access as a weapon. I spent months proving that my identity belonged to me. I watched strangers debate whether being pushed into snow was serious enough to count. I learned that control does not begin with a locked door. It begins when one person decides another person's consent is an obstacle to be managed. The sentence cannot return the marriage, the money, or the trust he used. It can only name what happened and protect others from the pattern." The judge thanked me. Adrian received a substantial sentence. I left the courthouse without waiting for cameras. That evening, I returned to Windermere, now Eleanor House, for the first community dinner. The residents had moved in 2 weeks earlier. Their identities were protected, so there were no reporters, donors, or public speeches. The gathering included residents, staff, legal advocates, childcare workers, and a few members of the independent board. My father attended because the board invited him, not because he owned the room. The dining room looked entirely different. Round tables filled the space. Children had made paper snowflakes and taped them to the windows. A toddler slept in a carrier beside his mother. 2 teenagers argued over a card game. Someone had burned the first tray of bread, and the smell made everyone laugh. No one sat at the head. I carried a bowl of soup to an empty place beside Rosa, the woman whose story had first made me imagine the house differently. "Big day?" she asked. "Yes." "You? Okay, I do not know yet." "That is allowed." Across the room, my father was helping a little boy repair a wooden train. He looked uncomfortable on the carpet and happier than I had seen him in years. Mrs. Alvarez rang a small bell. Not for a speech. Dinner was getting cold. We ate. Halfway through the meal, the lights flickered during a snow squall. Several residents went still. One woman instinctively reached for her phone. The backup generator activated within seconds, and the room brightened again. A staff member explained the system. "No one outside can disable the power or access controls," she said. "The backups are independent. The woman's shoulders slowly relaxed. That detail meant more than chandeliers, legal victories, or property value. Safety is often built from ordinary systems that work when fear expects them to fail. After dinner, I walked to the reading alcove. My mother's walnut chair sat beside the window. No longer at the head of anything, a young girl had curled into it with a book. Her socked feet rested against one carved rose. She looked up, worried she had taken a forbidden place. "May I sit here?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It is for reading." She returned to her book. I stood beside my mother's photograph and thought about the anniversary night, Lydia's hand on the chair, Adrian's fingers around my arm, snow entering my shoes, the motorcade approaching through darkness. For months, people treated the arrival of those cars as the moment power changed hands. They were wrong. Power changed hands when I stopped arguing with Adrian's version of reality. It changed when I read the trust agreement, called the bank, preserved the records, and accepted that love could not make fraud accidental. It changed when I asked my father for documents rather than rescue. It changed when I refused to hide his failure to strengthen my own case. It changed when Wintermere stopped being a symbol one man could claim and became a structure many women could use. The motorcade was visible. The decisions before and after it were the real story. 1 year after the trial, a letter arrived from Adrian. It came through counsel, in a plain envelope with no return address. Caroline called first and asked whether I wanted it opened, scanned, or destroyed unread. "Scan it," I said. "Then hold the original." The letter was 6 pages long. Adrian wrote about prison routines, mandatory classes, and the strange experience of having every door controlled by someone else. He described standing in line for meals, requesting permission to use a phone, and hearing locks engage after dark. For several paragraphs, he came close to understanding. He wrote that he now recognized how often he had treated access as proof of authority. He admitted moving my place card to provoke me. He admitted telling Lydia the estate would become his. He admitted using my grief, medication, and quiet personality to construct a story that people would believe. Then the letter shifted. He said my father's presence had always made him feel small. He said Wintermere tempted him because it represented a legitimacy he could never earn. He said Lydia encouraged his worst instincts. He said the investors were sophisticated adults who should have performed better due diligence. He said the sentence was excessive. At the end, he asked me to visit. He wanted closure. I read the letter twice. Not because I was uncertain, but because I had once confused explanation with change. Adrian could describe his behavior accurately and still arrange each fact around himself. Even his insight required an audience. I replied through Caroline with 4 sentences. "I received your letter. I acknowledge the admissions it contains. I will not visit or resume personal contact. Any future communication must concern legally required matters and pass through counsel." I did not add that I forgave him. I did not add that I hated him. Both would have offered a place in my inner life that no longer belonged to him. The letter was stored with the case records. That winter, Eleanor House reached full capacity. It served women from many backgrounds, a teacher whose husband controlled every bank password, a surgeon whose spouse threatened to expose private medical information, a recent immigrant whose documents had been locked away, a retired woman whose adult child attempted to take her home, and a college student escaping a partner who tracked her phone. Their stories were not versions of mine. That distinction guided the program. We did not force every experience into a familiar script about a cruel husband, a secret fortune, and a dramatic rescue. Some women returned to their partners with safety plans. Some chose divorce. Some needed immigration counsel. Some needed disability support. Some had money but no privacy. Others had no financial resources at all. One resident did not want to speak about what happened and communicated with staff, mostly through written notes. The house adapted to them. That was the opposite of control. I resumed part-time work in property acquisitions, but not at my father's company. I joined a small community development fund that restored neglected buildings into affordable housing and local business spaces. My surname could still open doors. So I disclosed the connection and recused myself when family interests appeared. I wanted work where every decision had to survive review, not merely carry authority. My father remained chairman during the environmental remediation process, then announced a structured retirement. He did not present it as sacrifice. He said the company needed leadership unburdened by the loyalty networks of his generation. At his final annual meeting, he invited one of the affected workers to speak. The man described headaches, fear, and the anger of learning that executives had possessed information he was denied. My father listened from the front row. He did not explain market pressure or job saving. When the man finished, my father stood and apologized without conditions. Later, in the car, he said, "I kept waiting to feel less ashamed after doing the right thing. Did you know? Maybe shame is not payment. What is it, information?" He considered that. "You sound like your mother." For the first time, the comparison did not feel like another role I was expected to inherit. Celeste visited Eleanor House twice a year as part of an approved volunteer program. She sorted, donated clothing, and prepared welcome baskets under staff supervision. She never met residents unless they chose to attend a group event. At first, she tried to add luxury products and handwritten cards with her name. The program coordinator removed both. Gifts should not create obligation. The coordinator explained. Celeste accepted the correction. One afternoon, she found me in the greenhouse. "Adrian writes to me every week," she said. "I assumed he would. He says I betrayed him by testifying." "What do you say?" "That I betrayed him much earlier by teaching him consequences were negotiable." We worked in silence for several minutes. Then she asked, "Do you think he can change?" "I think he can choose different behavior. I do not know whether he will." "Do you think I can?" "You already are. When you accept limits without demanding credit." She smiled faintly. "That sounded like your mother. Everyone says that when I tell them something inconvenient." We both laughed, surprising ourselves. Our relationship did not become mother and daughter. It became two women connected by damage, trying not to reproduce it. Roland moved into a smaller house after selling the property he had mortgaged. He volunteered with a financial literacy program for retirees, where he used his own story as an example of how status and trust can override skepticism. He never described himself as a victim without also naming his choices. Marissa rebuilt slowly. She and her husband separated for several months, attended counseling, and later reconciled under new financial agreements. She sent me a message on the anniversary of the party. "I am sorry," I laughed. "I was afraid to be the next target. And I chose safety beside the person hurting you. I understand that fear explains it but does not excuse it." I kept the message because it was specific. Specific apologies have weight. Vague apologies float toward the person who caused harm. The most important challenge to Eleanor House did not come from Adrian's lawyers or from a hostile neighbor. It came from a resident during our first independent audit meeting. Her name was Keisha. She had managed a restaurant before her husband, emptied their accounts, and persuaded friends that she was too unstable to work. She studied our governance chart, pointed to the trust's power to appoint 2 board members, and asked, "What stops your family from turning this place back into your family's house after you get tired of us?" No one in the room answered quickly. The documents were legal. The professionals were respected. The program had excellent intentions, yet the structure still asked residents to trust that the Ashfords would remain benevolent. Keisha's question revealed the weakness. We amended the charter, Former residents received permanent elected seats on the governing board. No trust representative could chair the grievance committee. Program rules affecting privacy, access, or length of stay required resident consultation. An outside organization received authority to investigate complaints against me, my father, or anyone connected to the property. My father disliked surrendering that much control. So did Adrian. I told him. He signed the amendment. Keisha later became the first former resident board chair. At her first meeting, she rejected a donor proposal to film a holiday dinner inside the house. The donor threatened to withdraw a large contribution, Keisha said. Then the contribution was purchasing access, not supporting safety. The money disappeared. The program survived. Watching her make that decision taught me something no trust agreement had taught Adrian: stewardship is not proven by possessing the final word. Sometimes it is proven by building a structure in which someone with less wealth can tell you no and remain safe afterward. On the second anniversary of the night, I was locked outside. Snow began shortly before dinner. There was no formal event. Eleanor House had a movie night scheduled. Children carried blankets into the library. Staff made popcorn. A resident named Jasmine was preparing to move into her own apartment the following morning, and everyone had signed a card. I walked outside alone. The front steps had been repaired where my heel struck the stone. The fountain was covered for winter. Tire tracks from ordinary cars crossed the driveway. Staff vehicles. A grocery delivery. A resident returning from work. I stood in the place where I had fallen. The cold felt different because I could enter whenever I chose. Through the windows, I saw movement and light. No one was laughing at a woman outside. A child waved when she noticed me. I waved back. My phone vibrated. It was a message from the evening coordinator. We are starting the movie. Are you coming in? I typed yes. Before I reached the door, it opened from inside. Jasmine held it for me. For one instant, the old memory rose. Adrian at the threshold. Snow in the hall. Lydia calling from my mother's chair. Then the present replaced it. Jasmine was wearing slippers. A toddler clung to her leg. Warm air carried the smell of popcorn. You will freeze out there, she said. I am coming. Inside the library, the old walnut chair remained beside the bookshelves. No one had claimed it that evening. I sat on the carpet with everyone else. The film was a comedy. Half the children talked through it. The projector failed once and had to be restarted. Someone spilled juice. The evening was imperfect, ordinary, and safe. That was what Adrian never understood about ownership. He believed owning a place meant having the power to decide who belonged. My mother believed stewardship meant making belonging possible without surrendering anyone's freedom. For years, I allowed Adrian's definition to occupy the house because it sounded louder. The trust documents proved legal title. The life inside Eleanor House proved purpose. I still receive messages from strangers who have seen the doorbell recording. Many ask why I stayed calm. Why I did not fight Adrian in the dining room. Why I waited for the motorcade. Or why I did not have him arrested instantly. The answer is less cinematic than they expect. I was not calm every moment. I had been afraid for months. I had doubted my memory, softened evidence, and delayed decisions because the person harming me was also the person who knew my history. On the steps, I did not fight because the plan depended on preserving what happened, and because fighting a stronger person on ice might have injured me further. The motorcade was close because the fraud had already been reported. The legal process took time because justice built to survive appeal cannot operate like a shouted verdict at a party. The visible scene lasted 10 minutes. The exit took years. Anyone can be impressed by black cars entering a driveway. I am more impressed now by the less visible acts opening an account only you control. Copying a document. Telling one trustworthy person. Meeting an independent lawyer. Changing a password. Recording a date. or deciding that embarrassment is not more dangerous than silence. Not every person has a father with attorneys waiting nearby. Every person deserves systems that do not require one. That belief shapes Eleanor House more than my story does. The program is governed by professionals and former residents. It publishes audited finances. It limits donor influence. It maintains a complaint process, independent of the trust. I cannot remove a resident because I dislike her choices. My father cannot turn the house into a publicity event. No board member can revoke access alone. We built safeguards against ourselves. That may be the most honest form of power. On the wall near the front entrance hangs a small brass plaque. It does not contain my name. My father's name. Or Adrian's. It reads, "No one is required to surrender dignity in exchange for shelter." Below it sits a narrow table where residents can place keys, mail, and gloves. My mother's photograph stands there in a simple frame. She is laughing at something outside the image. Sometimes I imagine telling her everything. I would tell her I preserved the house but changed the rules. I would tell her the carved chair is now used for reading one now, not wills. I would tell her my father finally learned to leave when asked. I would tell her I stopped mistaking endurance for love. And I would tell her about the night Adrian placed another woman in her seat and tried to remove me from the story of my own life. He locked me outside the house that night because he believed possession was created by confidence. Witnesses. And a key in his hand. By morning, his credential was gone. By the following winter, the room he used to plan my removal belonged to attorneys helping other women preserve their names, homes, documents, and choices. He locked me outside my own house. By sunrise, he was the one who no longer had a key. This story carries meaningful educational value about personal dignity, financial responsibility, and the importance of protecting one's legal rights. Through Victoria's experience, viewers learn that marriage, family status, or long-term residence does not give anyone permission to control another person's property, identity, or decisions. Ownership must be established through lawful documents, and trust should never replace proper verification when homes, investments, or personal assets are involved. The story also demonstrates how emotional abuse and financial fraud can develop gradually. Adrian did not begin by openly stealing the estate. He first minimized Victoria's experience, misrepresented her professional abilities, isolated her from important decisions, and trained others to see her as unstable. This reminds viewers that manipulation often begins with small acts of disrespect before growing into coercion. Forged documents, financial exploitation, and physical violence. Most importantly, Victoria does not respond with uncontrolled revenge. She preserves evidence, consults legal and financial professionals, protects innocent investors, and allows an accountable process to determine responsibility. Her actions show that real strength is not measured by public humiliation or inherited power. It is shown through clear boundaries, verified facts, lawful action, and the courage to stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.